And then I'm going to reset the room. So here's how it's going to go. Garza, welcome in. Glad that you joined us.
What on earth got you interested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
Okay, so what's Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is...
What's Bitcoin?
Inflation-resistant money.
Bitcoin is the strongest asset the human race has ever invented.
Hello and welcome to the Bitcoin Effect Live. I'm Nate Martin and I am your host, and we are going to talk about deflation, the good and the bad, and what I think the two different the two different ways that deflation actually occurs. One of them is a positive, the other one is a negative. And if you'd like to join me on the podcast, you can actually join me on Twitter Spaces at BTC Effect is the Twitter handle that you can join me at. And you can also join me on my YouTube channel, which is the Bitcoin Effect. And you can write comments in there as well if you want to go ahead and join me there and see if the comments actually work, because this is the first time that I've tried doing this on Twitter Spaces and YouTube at the same time. Joining me on the stage right now is Matt Coons, and I'm glad that you decided to join me. Welcome in, sir.
Hey, appreciate it, Nate. Thanks for having me in.
I'm glad to. The reason I wanted to talk about this is because I've actually had some conversations with my son. He said, well, is deflation a good thing or a bad thing? And I had to kind of go into this diatribe as to what exactly happens when, one, the money supply is changed, or two, a community or a region or a country becomes a net importer or a net exporter. And those are the two main ways that I see, and I'm no economist, but those are the two main ways that I see that deflation or inflation can actually occur. We'll talk about deflation first, because we talk about Bitcoin, we talk about it being a finite supply and it not being government controlled. And so there's no way that reasonably that the supply of Bitcoin can be changed, or that the scheduled influx of money can be changed. And so we talked about deflation, and one thing that struck me is that if you have to find something to invest in that's actually going to make it so that you get more Bitcoin back, so that your investment is good. In an inflationary economy, you don't. You have to just find something that's going to try and beat inflation. But in a deflationary economy, it's going to be harder to find things that you can invest in that make it so you don't think that you're going to be out Bitcoin by investing in it. Not only that, but you have a new trusted party that you're trusting your money with to actually create a business that's going to be profitable, or at least break even. I made this point earlier, is that if you break even in some concern with Bitcoin, but you've created an innovation in something that everybody can use, then everybody is the better for it. Everything around you becomes cheaper anyway. So even if you break even by the numbers, you actually still have more buying power when it's all said and done. So that's the first way that deflation is good. When deflation becomes bad, it's when you can't increase the money supply and the community that you're in is actually spending more money on foreign goods, basically depleting the money supply that's available within that bloodstream. And then you're getting consumable goods. Well, you've consumed the goods, but you don't have as much money, which creates a problem because you don't have enough liquidity to be able to purchase and build capital expenditure so that you can actually continue to increase your economy. I hope I've kind of explained that rather well. Matt, Coons, do you have anything that I either missed or anything like that?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on exactly my thoughts. I think people get wrapped around the axle a little bit when they hear the word deflation and automatically think, oh no, I heard in school that's bad thing. But yes, I think one huge positive of deflation is when it's coming from efficiencies gained, like you just said, be that the adaptation of new technologies, the excising, the cutting out of expensive middlemen, and things along that nature. And you can look at countless examples from many different countries and different regions to illustrate those examples.
I forgot to turn my mic back on. I had everything else on, just didn't have the mic in. That's, and I'm glad that you're confirming what the idea was. I'm going to spend some time and actually turn it around and talk about an inflationary economy. And the reason I do that is because there is one thing that we need to talk about after I discuss the inflationary economy, because the same thing holds true as far as being a net importer or a net exporter as a country. If you're a net importer, then you're utilizing consumable goods, but in the process, you're actually depleting the money supply that's there. That happened back in 2008, 2009, to the point where quantitative easing became necessary. And then it happened again during COVID. So what is the outcome of doing that? Does it soften the blow of what could have been a depression, much like we had in 1920? It could have. We're not really going to know, but that's the historical precedent that we have to actually take a look at. The other thing, though, is that in an inflationary economy, what you have going on is that when you increase the money supply, then you have more dollars that are demanding the goods and services that are consumables specifically that are here. And it makes prices go up because, the analogy I use is that if you got 10 people that go to an auction, and there's a specific amount of goods that's available at the auction, and each person comes with $100. Well, you know that you're pretty much on equal footing with everybody that's got the $100, and kind of what the value of the whole lot of the auction is going to be. It's $1,000. Well, if somebody else comes in with $500, well, then suddenly you've got to bid more on the things that you wanted to bid on in order to try to get that item. So you're going to have to spend more money on it. When you increase the money supply, then you're going to increase the amount of money that's necessary to get the goods and services that you want. Now, the reason I bring that up is because we did have COVID come in. We did have a situation where the government thought it was necessary to increase the money supply because liquidity was going down because we didn't have people working, and therefore we didn't have productivity to be able to export goods and services, or even have our own citizens utilize goods and services. And that didn't just happen here in the United States, but that happened worldwide. So I suppose the question that I would ask, because I don't have the answer, which is why I have the Bitcoin effect, is to ask questions and have people give me their opinions and their answers with their solutions as to what could have happened. Now, if we'd have had a Bitcoin economy, and Matt, because you're on the stage and because I've talked with you, or we've bantered back and forth on spaces before, I'll ask you this: what could have happened if we would have had a sound money system and the government didn't have the opportunity to be able to print more money when the liquidity went down in March, April, and May of last year? I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I'd love to believe that the government would have had a sizable rainy day fund. Maybe this wishful thinking, especially in these days and the examples we have across the world, but it just seems like that, much like we individually have a quote unquote emergency fund. We know from experience that crisis and disaster is guaranteed throughout our human history. You can set your watch to it. Seems to be. In fact, they even seem to be occurring a little more frequently than we're used to. But and then let's assume that even then you don't have enough money for everyone to go around. Well, then we have the very healthy natural process of the failing businesses and the underwater indebted enterprises flat out don't make it. And just like a margin trader who's way out over their skis and making risky bets, and then a black swan event happens and they get liquidated. Well, same thing could and should, honestly, I think, happen to businesses. You make your risky bets, and it is only in recent history in our lifetimes that we've had too big to fail, and then in 2020 the introduction of everything is too big to fail, and everyone gets a business wise, every business gets some sort of free bailout, if you're lucky enough. So my thoughts.
when is the tipping point though? Because there's theoretically there's a point in time when there's just not enough oil in the motor or blood in the bloodstream to keep the motor running. And so what happens when the economy comes to a screeching halt? What does business do, or what does private enterprise do? Because obviously I think that you and I agree that we don't want government to continue to try to, keep priming the pump, as it were, in order to keep that running. So what are the natural processes that occur to get an economy like that kickstarted again? Because I don't know what those are.
I would first ask the question of why would we want to empower the government to be able to flip a light switch and shut off the economy at their whim or not? Maybe that is a power that is too awesome for any small group of individuals that only get reelected every 2 years, every 4 years, every 6 years. Maybe that's just too awesome of a power for them to wield. And maybe perhaps that was the main problem all along. But okay, can't. This is the situation we're in now. Yeah, I think that you I mean, if you literally can't print money out of free thin air, then you truly are subject to poor planning, and now you're truly reliant on others who anticipate downturns in bear markets, and it's just a whole different mindset of you can't make bets that you can't cover, or else they can and will bite you back.
I agree with you on that, and I think that you and I are both thinking, because I don't think you're 50 years old. I'm 50 and then a little bit more, but neither one of us have lived through a sound money system. I don't think we've ever been taught one. I was 4 years old when the Nixon shock occurred, so we've never been taught a system whereby it's actually beneficial to save money. Not only that, but we've never actually seen news or policy that has been aggregated utilizing a sound money system. We've always seen an inflationary Keynesian system, and so we don't even know what policy should look like or what the foundation should be, because we've been looking at the national debt rising just year after year after year, and I've never known anything else. I've never known there to be either a surplus or there to be money in, like you said, a rainy day fund, so that when emergencies like this occur, we don't have to borrow money. We can actually utilize what's already there. So we're starting. We have to start from a foundation where we actually think that there are people in government that are responsible, and the only way to make them responsible is to make it so they can't print money. That's our big issue. So as we go into these, what is the situation that a country should be in? And then you got to start talking. And now I'm going to go off on a tangent. Now you got to start talking about foreign policy, because if you do get yourself into a situation where you're beginning to grind to a halt, then you have to rely on relationships with allies or with nations and corporations that are outside of your political purview to want to help you, either because you've already helped them or because you have a good enough relationship with them that they know that you would do the same for them in a similar regard. I don't even think we think that way. And, so those are my thoughts on how policy is going to change in a Bitcoin standard. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Oh, I absolutely 100% agree. I think we've seen in Bitcoin's short history, we've seen that those early adopters to sound money on a small scale, on an individual level, or even a small organizational level, to the quickest adopters go the spoils, and they get the biggest benefits. And I don't think it's too much of a far stretch to expect the same thing to happen on a national level, on a countrywide, on a worldwide level with countries. Those that recognize the benefits of either adding the optionality of Bitcoin as a legal tender, or putting it directly onto their national balance sheet to shore up their quote unquote fiat currency, whatever variation it might be. But those national early adopters are just guaranteed to enjoy the benefits the quickest, the earliest. And it's so true. Whenever there's a crisis, whenever there's a disaster, we always assume that, well, there will be someone to lean on, or we will get help, or hopefully you have families or friends, or the government or FEMA will swoop in, or even if you're an unlucky country like let's say Greece, or any number of different nations that have fallen on hard times, that maybe the World Bank or the IMF would bail them out. But we've never contemplated that what happens when there is no one big enough to bail you out. And boy, does it look like year after year, decade after decade, we are quickly looking like we're going to test that whole experiment.
Now, in the book, The Bitcoin Standard, which is really the first time that I remember being exposed to this information, although I'm certain that I was exposed to it in middle school and high school, I just don't remember because I didn't care. The difference between the 1920 to 21 depression versus the 1929 through 44 depression. And the main difference being that there was a laissez-faire policy that was in place from 1920 to 21. There was also a gold standard that was in place, as opposed to 1929 to 1945, where Roosevelt basically made gold illegal for individuals to own. And so they could actually hide how much gold they had and be able to print as many gold certificates as they needed to in order to, one, try to kickstart the economy, and two, actually fund the war effort. Do we have the availability to have just a year and a half depression as opposed to a 14, 15-year depression if the government just, one, kept their hands off, and two, didn't try to print money so that we could have a quote, soft landing?
Yeah, that game theory is complicated. I don't know. I think that there's a real problem with how quickly do nation states smarten up? How quickly do they realize that, wait, there's no one bigger than me to back me up if my assumptions and my bets that I've based my currency, or I've based my economy on, what if those all go wrong? And when you listen to the Fed, and when you listen to the just yesterday the IMF public forum discussion, it's almost like they don't even contemplate that they could be wrong, which should definitely give us pause. But yeah, I just come back to the nations that humble themselves and question, maybe we need to quickly adopt a sound money system. We need to adopt Bitcoin because maybe we are wrong. Those nations will fare the best in the long term, short term and long term. Especially if you don't even have control over your own your national fiat, if you're reliant on someone else's money printer.
Trying to find someone that is a politician that says, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake." Those are few and far between. It's just my opinion on that.
Yeah.
And the thing is that they're also beholden to a very fickle electorate. meaning that we have gotten so used to being able to be loud enough and our votes be strong enough to do exactly what Ben Franklin warned us against, and that is to vote ourselves money out of the public coffers. And without a re-education of people that, one, work is a good thing because it benefits the community as a whole, not just yourself. And two, you need to govern yourself, and government should really be a last resort for everything, including disagreements in contracts, including how a particular community decides to celebrate Christmas. I mean, leave them alone. Okay, there's no reason that Washington, D.C. needs to get into the conversations in Lansing, in Tallahassee, in Augusta. They don't need to get into those conversations because the people of those communities have determined that they have elected people to go to those state capitals and figure out what the laws should be for them. And if they disagree with them, they can move to another state. I can move from Michigan to Indiana if I choose to because I don't like the laws in Michigan. People can move around freely in the United States, which is something that people in Europe can't do. And I recognize that is a totally different dynamic than what they get to enjoy, that we get to enjoy that they don't. I mean, the European Union was a weak attempt at really trying to reinvent the United States. And unfortunately, they put more central authority into the EU than even what the Constitution did in the United States in 1787. So, I'm just rambling on here. I'm glad that you decided to join me and kind of go over, because this is exactly what my podcast is supposed to be. It's supposed to be, look, let's ask questions and have conversations about what Bitcoin is actually going to do to decision making and policy making, and if we don't come up with these hypotheticals and actually discuss them, then we're not going to know what our position is when it actually occurs that Bitcoin wins and the dollar is basically toilet paper, and we have to operate as such. So, Matt Coons, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm probably going to post these thoughts as a podcast. Just because this is a subject that I wanted to discuss, and I'm glad that you were there to bounce them off of. For the other listeners that are here on the Twitter Spaces, I want to thank you for stopping by. This is going to be available on my podcast, which is the Bitcoin Effect, BTC Effect. It's also going to be available on YouTube after this stream is over. On the Bitcoin Effect. So if you missed some of these conversations and you wanted to hear more of what Matt and I were talking about when it came to inflation and deflation and what policy is going to look like with a sound money system, then by all means, you can visit those places as well. So Matt, thanks again for joining me. I really appreciate that. And listeners that are on the spaces, I appreciate you coming by and enjoying what this testing of the equipment is going to sound like. So thanks again, everybody, and I'll look forward to seeing you again on another space.